Hi, today's episode is all about the next phase of the lightning process. We've already started to focus on the idea that we know that the brain affects the body and we can influence the brain. We've also looked at the idea of neuroplasticity, which is this concept within neurology that the more you use a pathway, the stronger it, more powerful it becomes. And therefore it's really super important to recognize, are we activating and using pathways that are encouraging health or not? And so this is the next part, which is awareness. We need to become aware of which pathways we're using. Much of the time this is happening without us knowing. We're just thinking thoughts, we're engaging in habits, behaviors, checking our body, focusing our attention on a particular part of our health. And through habit, very often neuroplastic pathways, those kind of ways of thinking are not very useful. So becoming aware of which pathways we're running, which patterns are kind of going on in the background within our nervous system, but really not consciously choosing them, they're just kind of occurring. Starting to be aware of that has got to be the first step. So there are a few things that are useful to learn about this. First of all, what are signs that you might be engaging in pathways that aren't healthy or helpful for you? One is recognizing how much of your thoughts are about symptoms and problems. Now, it's completely reasonable that you'll spend a lot of time, if you've been stuck in a health crisis or health issue for a long time, that a lot of your thoughts will be about your health. You know, how I'm going to cope with the day, what if I do this, how will it feel, how am I feeling today? What's interesting is the amount of times that you do that, because of neuroplasticity, further builds that hyper-awareness of that symptomatology. And because of neuroplasticity, the more energy focus that's going down that neural pathway, the more that kind of takes up your brain space. And what we need to be doing is moving away from that. We need to moving into pathways of health and recovery. So there's some stuff I talked about in another earlier episode about language, really checking your language. Notice where is your attention? What are your thoughts? How are you using your brain? And one of the ways we use our brain, not only signaling between the tissues of the body and giving them information and receiving information, but of course another thing our brain does is thinking, processing information. So changing that is really important. Certain signs will help you. So we talked about language, words, focusing upon the symptoms, on the trouble, on the areas of your body that aren't working, instead of maybe focusing on the parts of your body that are working, that are good. Another great thing to do is to check in with your state. There are certain states that really don't help health. Being hard on yourself, being furious and frustrated, which again is incredibly normal and reasonable response to getting stuck in health, but it doesn't help. It keeps us stuck. Stress, for sure, is really well evidenced in the research base that stress, particularly long-term stress, damages our immune system, makes it more difficult to heal and recover and function. Another great thing to watch out for is sense of humor. If you've lost the sense of humor, then you're definitely in trouble. You're activating neurology that isn't about recovery, and you're more likely to be stuck in what's called a fixed mindset, in the neurology that is just going to keep everything as it is. And if you want to make change, you've got to start thinking and acting and using your brain in a different way. There's another piece to this which people often get confused about in the lightning process. We talk a lot about being positive and using good neurology, but the lightning process is not just positive thinking. Just thinking positively is not really going to get you out of the hole that you're in. There's a kind of measure that we have in the lightning process, which is not, is your thought positive or negative? Because that's just far too simplistic. There's a much more interesting question we ask, which is, are your thoughts, the way you're using your brain, are they helping your health? Are they life enhancing? Are they useful? Are they moving you in the direction that you want to go? That's a much more interesting question. It's a much more nuanced question. So for instance, let's say someone close to you dies and you feel grief. Now grief, you could argue, is a negative emotion, a negative way of thinking. But actually, if you look at the other version we've just described, is it useful? Is it life enhancing? Then actually, having lost someone who's important to you and grieving about it is a completely life-affirming, life-enhancing thing to do. It's a normal, decent, reasonable response to loss. And with that measure, it makes it simpler to decide, is this the appropriate, useful response for me? Now, if you've lost your hamster, when you were 5 and every day and now you're 30, you still cry about it, there might be some issues there about whether that's an appropriate way to respond to that long, long ago loss. But if it's a recent loss, it's completely reasonable and useful, in fact, to be able to process that important event in this way. And so that's a really big distinction between just being positive all the time, which is, some people think that's a way to run your life. We take a little bit more of this different view, not kind of judging things as positive or negative, but asking yourself, and it's not according to anybody else, but what do you think? Is this a useful, life-enhancing response to what's going on? Now, what's interesting is that many people are stressed. And stress most of the time doesn't actually help things, and yet, I put my hand up to this as much as anybody else, there are definitely times when we find ourselves stressed, even though it's not useful. And being able to just pause for a minute and kind of consider this question, is this useful for me? Gives us a starting point to kind of go, no, it isn't. Then the next bit would have to be, and this is again another piece of the lightning process, we've got awareness, this sense of kind of choosing, choice, right? Is this a pathway that's useful for me? Then the next phase would then need to be, okay, now I'm aware of this, what am I going to do about it? How am I going to shift my neurology into a different place and space? And I'll be talking more about that on other episodes. But for today, just really think about this concept of being aware. Where am I steering my neurology? If my neurology responds to usage and develops and builds, changes its actual structure and architecture according to use, am I using it in a way that's building me further into the problem without meaning to? Or am I consciously moving my neurology in the direction that is going to make a difference? Because we know that, for instance, your immune system is affected by your neurology, your muscles affected by your neurology, the way you use energy is affected by your neurology. It just affects everything. So being aware of which pathways you are running, and a key part of the lightning process here is saying, it's not your fault. If you're running these pathways, you're not to blame for it at all. This is just a function of neuroplasticity. The more we practice things, the better we get at it. The important thing is not about, have I caused this? Am I responsible for this? The really important question is, what could I do to move in a different direction? So it's not useful to consider, fault and blame. But it is really useful to go, well, I wonder what I could do about it. I wonder what's within my power to make a difference, to influence. So awareness, what pathways are we using? Are they the way I want to be using them? Even if that's just what's been happening in my body without me kind of being aware of it, developing that awareness and then making some choice to move in a different direction. And then, of course, you need the skills. This is stuff that gets taught on the lightning process, and I will cover some of it in future episodes. Then going, right, how do I move into a different set of neurological pathways? So I hope that's useful. Have a think for yourself over the next week. What percentage of the time am I steering my brain towards the rocks? If your brain is a ship, stay steering towards the rocks, or to the calm, beautiful islands. What percentage of the time is the neurology I'm building supporting health or not? See you in the next one.